Well, speak of the devil, here I am at the Riverwalk, thinking about different things, psychology, science, society, and here in the on the bulletin board is a program inviting families to basically take part in a program to study the physical activity, sleep habits, screen time, and behavior, emotional behavioral development, healthy lifestyle, etc. Maybe you can read it, maybe you can't. It's free. But anyway, what I was going to talk about was science and psychology. But I had an analogy which basically tying psychology and science together in a way, and that is the child who gets a toy for Christmas or whatever, you know. And I don't know if other people have experienced this or seen this as well, but what often happens is when the child gets a toy, say it's a motorized dump truck or whatever it is, you know, and they play with it for a while, and then they get curious about how it works. So what do? They take it apart. Take it apart to study it and try to understand how it works, you know. I did this when I was a kid with all kinds of toys. I'm sure other people did too. But what happens is that you take it apart and you don't necessarily understand how an electric motor works. You might learn something from it. But in any case, you usually get in trouble because you broke your toy. All right, so the parents get angry at you. But in a way, it was just sort of a curiosity. You could call it a scientific curiosity. Science, you know, reductionism and cutting things apart. Well, in a sense, this is what we're doing, what science does with the universe. So you cut things apart, essentially break them, in the hopes to understand them better. But the understanding is limited, and then what you wind up with is a broken toy. And a broken toy could be, you could equate that with the climate, you know, things like that. So anyway, some of the things I've been talking about science, people get very, very uptight and defensive. But when you try to define science, well, it's like the scientific method itself is simply an idea. The applications of science, scientists themselves, that's all something different. That's us. So, say for example, you know, all the scientists working in the world, you know, they're largely invisible, except for certain, you know, pop star scientists. And the ones that are invisible, they often need grants from universities or funding from corporations, and that's how they manage to make ends meet. But the angle that they're studying is twisted a bit toward whatever the needs of the funding requires, right? Those organizations. So anyway, you've got the scientific method itself, you know, written in stone, the sort of holy scripture. You've got the people who are the scientists, in the sense the priesthood. And then you've got those who go out, what would you call them? What the hell's the word for it? People go out to Africa to convert, you know, primitive people and stuff, you know. You've got them. But essentially, you know, you've got all this damage. So what are we going to do about this damage, right? Well, another thing about science, science you would say, or they would say, encompasses all these different disciplines, you know, physics, fluid dynamics, biology, on and on and on and on. Well, they rarely ever Well, they don't really. They don't include psychology as a science. There's plenty of study done on psychology, plenty of writings, plenty of insights, all kinds of stuff. But it's it's not a science, it's social science or something like that. And unfortunately, what happens with people is that their psychology determines their path in life, unless they can grapple with it, alter it, and transcend it. But what happens with people just like that flyer back there about children? If children are basically dominated in the first 5 to 7 years of their lives, that is, the child, is looking up to the adult world, doesn't know anything much, well, so we say, but is essentially looking for love and approval and acceptance. Well, what happens to the child when you think you're being a good parent and you say, oh, well, you're doing that the wrong way, you need to do it this way. Okay, well, that's not approval. And that goes on into school, where it's like, you have to get the right answer. No, you got the wrong answer. So, anyway, what happens to people from childhood is that when they're endlessly dominated and they don't get love and approval, they get some, but it's incomplete. What happens is that it creates trauma, right? Now, some people might sneer and say, oh, well, trauma is only when you get bullwhipped or get your fingernails pulled out, or something like that. But that's not so. From an emotional sense, it basically creates trauma. So what our society does with children, for the most part, there are exceptions, but it mainly creates trauma in the children. So you wind up with an adult population that is not too healthy. And because they've grown up with domination, then really that's all they know. So they dominate really because that's what they've been educated to do. That's their education. So anyway, it doesn't matter, so much what the adult says, what the adult thinks they are. What we have essentially is a lot of traumatized children in adult roles, and that is often called the core self, that age, first stage of life, age 1 to 7. So the core self doesn't change, it only is modified by experience. Yep, well, he's a good example. And anyway, the trauma, where was I? Oh yeah, so science, for example, lots of scientists out there, people promoting their views and things, and it's like, the thing about science, it looks out, we're looking out at the universe, we're looking at all these things, we're studying things, we're doing the good thing, we're curious, we're learning, Yeah, well, they look out there, but they don't look inside. And either they don't know how to look inside, they don't think it's relevant, they're completely unaware of their deepest motivations, but there they are anyway. So when it comes to people, popularizers of science like Stephen Hawking or Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, what was their core experience, childhood experience, I guess what I'm suggesting is an ethical application of science when needed, and not to be used for domination of each other, domination of nature, economic domination, and so on. So when you look at the mental health of other groups, I could use the Ulithi Islanders in Pacific or Australian Aborigines They lived in complete cooperation. There was no competition. And as a result, they were psychologically very healthy. So anyway, we don't have that. And we have the big mess now that it's coming down on us, which, rising temperatures, flooding, fires, all this other stuff. And will it change? Will it be averted? Is it meant to? Can it? Probably not. But then again, what civilization goes on forever? People would like to think, oh, we can't die. The human race must go on forever. There again, that's a kind of linear view of time. It's like, oh, we've got to get to the end of the track here. It's like the fact that we exist at all in this vast stretch of eternity is meaningless because we're on a path, It's like, well, perhaps so, yeah, there is a path. There's a path of development, growth for us as conscious beings. Many levels to it. So anyway, that example, which slipped my mind, connecting basically people who are traumatized by domination when they're children, and then the fact that they tend to carry that forward in adult life. Well, this happens a lot in families where, say, there's a toxic relationship. Say, for example, the father is abusive. And what'll happen is, it'll be terrible, very difficult on the family, on the children, on the wife. And then, but when the children grow up, oddly enough, the daughters, say, will marry a man who is very similar to her father. Now you would think, well, you shouldn't do that. You escaped from your father. Why would you go back and find another person that's basically working the same way? And the reason is because that's what they know. That's all they know. That's what they're familiar with. So when you're dominated as a child, you grow up and you will dominate. You will seek out other people that dominate, and then you will get caught up in a battle royale with the people who dominate. You're trying to dominate them, they are trying to dominate you, and it goes on forever. And I think politics is a very good example of that.